survey. So please, if you get a chance, when you get a chance to complete our survey, will be really helpful for us as we continue on with academic integrity weeks for the future. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ingrid Steiner, the Associate Director of Faculty Development at the Center for Excellence in Teaching, to kick things off.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming today. So really the idea behind this was that we at CET, and I know around campus, if coordinating with Jacques' office as well, we get a lot of questions from faculty and instructors in terms of how to start a dialogue, how to open up a dialogue around academic integrity when you might suspect or you want to engage in that, proactively engage in a conversation regarding this. So we've assembled a panel of experts today with different perspectives. So what I'm going to do is help facilitate, ask some questions, and we'll keep that going. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. So Dan, I'm going to start off with our faculty perspective.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me here today. My name is Dan Pecanino. I'm an associate teaching professor in the writing program in Dornsife, and I'm also the immediate past president of the Academic Senate. And again, I'm glad to be here to talk about this.
And Kathy and Tom from the Ombuds.
Hi, Kathy Greenwood. I'm from the Ombuds office for the UPC campus.
And I'm Tom Kosakowski. I cover the health sciences campus, which now includes a couple of the schools on UPC that are part of HSC.
And of course, we've included the Office of Academic Integrity. So we have Jacques and Nancy here today.
Hi, everyone. Jacques Zalma serves as the director for the Office of Academic Integrity. Really, really excited about this this conversation. Ingrid and I have been talking about it for a while, and it's nice to be able to see this come to fruition. So Ingrid, thank you so much for helping put this group together too.
Hi everyone, Nancy Dominguez. I serve as the Assistant Director for the Office of Academic Integrity. Thank you for including me.
So we're going to get started because I know we only have 60 minutes for this very important topic, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of rich conversation. So Dan, the first question I'm going to direct towards you, but everybody else can jump in and contribute as needed. So as a faculty member, sometimes it can be challenging to broach the topic of academic integrity with students. Can you share some practical strategies for initiating these conversations in a way that promotes openness and trust?
Yeah, sure. And I want to start by just saying, obviously, every kind of class is different, and there are, going to be different norms and expectations, and also just functional differences between large classes and small classes and how you approach this. I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who teaches primarily small courses, but I think some of these things are applicable across the types of courses that we have at USC. So I think one of those things is, first and foremost, I think it's really important before the course even begins to have a pedagogical sense of what you're assessing and why you're using particular tools to assess it, whether it's a paper, a test, a group project, whatever it is. I think then it's important to actually talk to your students about this underlying thinking, right? In terms of, okay, we're going to write 3 papers in this class, and here's why, right? Here's what I'm hoping to kind of, here are the learning outcomes from each of those things, for each of those papers. And I think that can lead into a good conversation about what sorts of things would constitute an academic integrity violation in relation to each of the kinds of assessments that you're doing. So being pretty clear up front about what it is, why you're doing it, and then what represents a deviation from what's appropriate in relation to those assessments. I also think then having a clear sense of your own goals might open up some new possibilities for assessment that make it harder or less appealing for students to, for lack of a term, cheat, right? If that's kind of what we're talking about here today. So I also think, though, it's really important to explain to students why doing their own work in relation to these assessments is actually beneficial for them now and in the future. So on one level, I think, the way I talked about my students about it is often just in terms of cost-benefit analysis. And I try to put it pretty bluntly, right? Okay, odds are good because of how my course is structured and the way that I teach it, that if they do their own work, they're going to pass the class, right? The odds are very good that they're going to do that. If they don't do their own work, the odds are pretty good they're not going to pass the class. And so just on a very basic level, I think that's one of the pitches I make. But that's really blunt. But on a deeper level, I kind of try to explain, based on the thinking that I've done previously, what is the real value add of doing the work for them intellectually and professionally, right, in my class? Like, what does this help them do later on? And I do this throughout the semester. So it's not just a one-time conversation that happens at the very beginning of the school year. It does happen then, but it happens several times throughout the semester. Just what is the value add here? What are you kind of going to learn to do here that will be helpful? Now, admittedly, I teach a skills-based course, and I think that is something that is, I think it's easier to make that pitch often, especially in professional terms. You know, I can say, you know, obviously we're all sitting around talking about generative AI, but I still think there's an importance for students to learn how to write. And I can talk to them about critical thinking and all the things that kind of underlie what we're trying to do there. But even in courses that aren't explicitly skills-based, they are skills-based courses. Courses where students are doing a lot of reading, a lot of textual analysis, things like that. While they may seem like content-based courses to students, they're not. They're teaching them these valuable personal and professional skills. So I think, again, just reiterating that throughout the semester and the value of the work is important. But bottom line, I think you have to think about your learning outcomes, align your assessments to those learning outcomes, and then talk to students about that over and over again throughout the semester, and be just very honest about why academic integrity violations matter in this context and what they're kind of not getting if they don't choose to do their own work. So that's a kind of opening kind of salvo there that I think is important.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the idea of going back to this throughout the semester. So oftentimes, it's on the syllabus, you'll read it on the syllabus on the first day, and it's kind of a one and done. But really the importance of this and reiterating that and providing that foundation and then building upon that foundation throughout the semester. Thank you. So our second question I'm going to address to Kathy and Tom is addressing academic integrity concerns can sometimes lead to emotional reactions from students, and that can be a positive reaction or a negative reaction. How can faculty members effectively navigate and manage these emotional responses while still addressing the issue at hand?
Yes, Tom and I see a lot of emotion. So first off, that first communication that you're letting the student know that something's been picked up somewhere. So I would just say clarity of that communication. Like, I'm reaching out to let you know that potential academic, integrity violation has occurred. It was on this homework or this essay. Let them know what specific, item that got flagged. That's going to help manage their anxiety. And then explain, this is the process. If you're going to do a faculty student resolution, explain that. If you're sending it to the Office of Academic Integrity, explain that, give them some resources. Here's the website, the process is there. It's an ongoing process. You've not been found responsible yet. Save your homework, your notes for something, because sometimes it happens at the final and everybody throws out everything from that class. I'm done. Sometimes, information in their notes may show where or how they got information. If they're saying, you got this from AI, no, here's my notes. The other thing is consideration in that first explanation. Some students are more vulnerable than others. Some students, you won't know it, have had other academic integrity allegations or charges. So this one the potential is way bigger, and you wouldn't know that. Some students are on visas, and if something could end up in expulsion, it could be problematic for them to go back to their country with a mark. So different students may have different capacities and bandwidth. So managing what's going to happen, here's the process, here's what happens, and then possibly saying, we have some confidential resources for you on campus because this can be difficult. And here's the ombuds and ombuds.usc.edu. They can reach out to us, possibly counseling, and, just sort of say, if you've handed it over to the Office of Academic Integrity, they'll be reaching out to you. If you're willing to have a conversation with them, if you're going to do a faculty student resolution, when the semester starts up again or next week, if you have some availability, let's schedule a time to meet. So sometimes students don't understand intent either. So sort of declaring your intent, I'm just letting you know that this has been flagged and here's the process. And, if they keep bugging you, and you've sent it to OAI, just say, I understand this process can take a while. I'm sorry, I'm not able to say anything. Please know you're in competent hands. They have a process. And then, student counseling, ombuds, there's still resources available for you. Tom, thoughts?
Yeah, those are great tips. I would maybe offer 3 things to keep in mind if you're confronted with a student who's come into office hours, or they've started a Zoom meeting or some other interaction with you where they seem to be really escalated and you're caught off guard. So let me give you 3 things that I think you can do in that moment that might help de-escalate the conversation a little bit. First thing is manage your emotions. You're going to convey to them that you're not going to escalate this and you expect them to have a civil conversation with you. It's really hard to manage someone else's emotions, so start by managing yours. Take some deep breaths and try to be in the moment. No matter how much they've put you on your back foot or made you feel defensive and argumentative. So first thing, remain in control of yourself. The second thing is try to listen to understand. It's very de-escalating for someone to feel like they have been heard. So if you can ask some questions, tell me why you're upset, tell me what I think, what you think I should know about this, get them to talk a little bit. That will de-escalate them a little bit. And you may learn something that is really surprising and change your perspective on this. It really doesn't do any harm to gather a little bit of information. And that will help you while you're managing your emotions. Like, okay, I'm going to put this back on them to talk a little bit and answer my questions. So those open-ended questions will buy you some time and give you a chance to, recenter yourself. And then the last thing, I think, if you can interject some time into the conversation, that will help you as well. And, you can make up excuses if you need to buy yourself a little bit of time. Thank you for coming to talk to me about this. I need to get to my next class. I have office hours. Send me an email. We'll set something up. If you can build in a little bit of time in the conversation, stretch things out a little bit, it'll give them a chance to maybe look at the resources that you've identified, maybe reread your email that brought them to you, maybe get them to talk to someone else and get refocused on what a constructive conversation would look like. And so if you can do that by stretching out that conversation, that will help you de-escalate them a little bit in the moment.
Great. And I appreciate that you both mentioned that it could be in a written format that you need to plan for a de-escalation, or in a face-to-face format. So it could happen either way. It could happen both ways. So really thinking about these strategies and then implementing them and having them available to you is very important.
Yeah.
So Dan and everyone, I'm sure you're all going to have perspectives on this one, but we'll start off with Dan. Oftentimes, students may not be aware that their actions constitute academic dishonesty. So how can faculty members approach these situations sensitively to educate students about academic integrity without creating a confrontational atmosphere?
So one of the things so I mentioned earlier that I think it's important very early on to talk about what constitutes academic integrity violations in the context of your course. But I actually, what's been very effective for me, and where I've seen a lot fewer academic integrity violations since I started doing this about 8 or 9 years ago, spending very early on showing students what academic integrity violations look like in my class. So and again, it's going to be different for each type of course in terms of what you teach, all of that. But we all have examples that we can think up or that we actually have handy to us. And so in my class, one of the areas that I think where students find themselves kind of encroaching on academic integrity violations without really understanding that they're doing it is paraphrasing, and not really understanding how to paraphrase properly, how to cite paraphrasing, what it means to paraphrase. So for instance, one of the things I often I ask my students, how many of you were told to put, when you paraphrase, you put something in your own words? Everyone's hands go up. I then explain to them, I ask them what that means. And they say, well, you know, you look at the thing and then you figure out what words you want to use to explain it yourself. And I said, well, okay, how many of you does that mean copying and pasting the thing and then changing some words? And they said, well, yeah, that seems like it would be appropriate. And I said, why is that not appropriate? And inevitably one student will say, well, you haven't really changed the structure, you haven't really kind of reduced the number of words overall, you haven't done the, and it's like, yes, what I just described was actually an academic integrity violation. What you just described was not, and that's the difference here. So I have models that I've made showing them this is proper quotation and citation, this is proper paraphrase and citation, this is this, and I'll kind of rip out examples from Turnitin from previous papers to just say, like, here's what Turnitin will show you in terms of patterns of, you know, strings of words and things like that. This is technically, you know, plagiarism, this is not, right? And I'll show them kind of the differences between these things. I've also obviously started to have to do that with generative AI and have discussions about generative AI tools. And I see my colleague Rob Waller here, who is also a fellow at the Center for Generative AI along with me. And one of the things we're all engaged in, there's about 17 writing program faculty who are involved in this work, is exactly these questions of how do we kind of draw the line for students between appropriate uses of generative AI in our classes, inappropriate uses. But again, I think you have to show them. I think actually carving time out of class to say, this is what good paraphrasing looks like. This is what good quotation looks like. This is what proper citation looks like in the context of the course. And again, it doesn't have to take that long. And once you've done that, you can say, well, we talked about this. We talked about this in class. I showed you this in class. Your paper is displaying exactly what I showed you is kind of inappropriate. So we kind of have to have this conversation now. So I think developing those materials, and again, in a lot of cases, it's not even like you have to develop a handout. You've probably used Turnitin before, and you can pull a paragraph and just highlight the places where Turnitin showed you that there were problems, things like that. So I think students have said in the past they're grateful to have seen this, because they didn't really know how to paraphrase properly. They were never taught that in high school. They were taught maybe how to quote Shakespeare or something like that. But then when they were trying to summarize things or paraphrase things, they didn't know how much of the text they could use without putting it in quotations and things like that. So I think showing them these things can be really helpful, so that they, going forward, they have like mental models of like, okay, I did this thing, he told me not to do this thing. How can I kind of change it a little bit so that it looks more like the thing he told me was okay? So that's one piece of advice that I've found works really well for me.
Great. So that idea of modeling, and I also think that has implications for students, not only that didn't see it in their K-12 environments or their preschooling, pre-college schooling, but also from different cultures. So there's different cultural approaches to citations and plagiarism and academic integrity in general. So that can be, and we have a very diverse student body here at USC, as everyone knows. So that can be very beneficial. Would others like to contribute to this question as well? Because I know you're all coming from different perspectives that could be helpful. Kathy.
Sometimes, you know, as ombuds, we can do perspective taking. So the students a lot of times get into us versus them, they're wrong, and like it turns hostile. So sometimes what we can do is help them take different perspectives. Like, you know, okay, if this goes poorly and you're found responsible, you know, I'll do worst case scenario, right? So it's to just go, basically, you're still probably, their main thing they're worried about for undergrad is getting into grad school. Like they can be a freshman and like, if I get an F on this assignment, then I fail this class, like, and they'll like, the whole world has ended. They'll take that 10, 20 years out. So we try to frame it like that probably won't happen. You'll still have a chance to get into grad school. You can explain this. So helping them focus on a time frame. The other thing is helping them go, what can you learn from this experience? Sometimes You know, we get thrown into the fire and, you know, we had to get stronger to get out of it. So will you be more careful on assignments? Can you be an evangelist and tell people, hey, this happened, like don't copy code on engineering classes? Or, you know, how can you use this as a learning experience? So sometimes having somebody else listen, which we do, and let them vent. We'll let them vent as long as they want, and then try to help them recenter. The other things we can do as ombuds saying, what can you do to refute this? So, you know, do you have logs on your computer? You know, were you accused of sharing something in a group chat? Don't erase them. What can you find? Do you have your class notes? You know, were there recordings of the class? Was the room you were taking the exam in, was there a camera? So we can just try to get them out of their emotional mind and more into a logical mind. Like, how can you frame this? How can you articulate your response in a non-defensive way? So sometimes we can help with tone, with communication, and sometimes they'll show us a letter that they're about to send to their professor, which is, you know, just going to put kerosene on the flame. And we could say, hold on, you know, might there be a better way? Like, instead of, hey, Joe, maybe it's dear Professor so-and-so. You know, I'm wondering if you can listen to the following, you know, 3 points of view. And, you know, so we can just try to help them sort of tone down that emotionality. But, you know, that can be in a moment and they can go up and down. But the other thing we try to do is say, how can you frame this as one class, one exam, one paper? How do you keep going? Like, you can't let all the rest of your schoolwork go down because this is, you know, it's like a splinter in their palm and it's the only thing they're thinking about. So helping them sort of frame it in the whole semester.
It's great advice. And it's great that we have the support on campus too. So our final question is actually about support and resources. So I want to make sure that we're all aware that we do have a lot of support. Both students have support as well as faculty and staff have support navigating these issues too. So Jacques and Nancy, I'd like to turn it to you. In a situation where a student denies any wrongdoing, so similar to what Kathy was saying, possibly a rebuttal or an appeal, or I did not do this, despite evidence that possibly suggests otherwise, what are some recommended approaches for faculty members to maintain a constructive dialogue and encourage accountability while attempting not to escalate tensions? And I think we'll start off with you from a more compliance policy standpoint, because obviously there are compliance and policies around this topic, and then we'll open it up for everybody.
No, I really appreciate the question. Yeah, I think first and foremost, that, you know, it really is about meeting the student where they're at, and really kind of addressing. I think this was already stated, but I think it bears to be restated. Is really talking about this specific instance. I have a concern about this assignment. I'm not concerned about you as a student. I'm not concerned about your, you know, we're not labeling the student as, for example, a cheater. We're talking about that there is something that went awry. We made a mistake potentially, and we're here to address and course correct and try to find ways that we can prevent this from reoccurring in the future, whether it be during your academic studying at USC, and also, more importantly, in some cases, during your career. So as instructors, as faculty, I think one of the things that I want to emphasize is that you are supported and you are encouraged to report any incident in which you believe or have reason to believe that a violation has occurred. And that is a very low threshold, and it's intentionally so. We want to make sure that, you know, academic integrity is upheld. It's part of our values. Our unifying values include accountability and integrity, and we want to make sure that at all costs that we're doing right by our students by upholding the reputation of the university, by making sure their return on investment is upheld. And oftentimes I hear from instructors that it is concerning to raise these points up with students, because of the fact that many times it is kind of feeling like we're being labeled as such. One of the things that I like to do during my meetings with students is to have them reflect on how excited they were when they got that acceptance letter from the university. What were the reasons that they wanted to come here in the first place? What are their goals and aspirations upon leaving? And how can we take an incident that is potentially a mistake and turn it into a positive? But that being said, regardless of how or why there is reason to think that a violation has occurred, instructors are encouraged and as closely to mandate it as possible, as I'd like to say, to report. There's an expectation that the report is submitted, and that report in and of itself is not, as was previously stated, a determining factor. It's not as though it's because I'm reporting this that you are now responsible. But rather to say that there is a process, and I highly encourage instructors to become aware of what that process or those processes are, so that when a student asks what to expect, that you can speak, with knowledge about that. For example, informing students that, because this incident is being reported, please do not withdraw from the course. If you were to withdraw, the registrar would actually re-enroll you. So we want to work with you to continue your participation in the class. I'm having this conversation with you so that we can engage and identify how we can become successful and continue to be successful in the class beyond this. One of the things that I also like to stress is that instructors, you're not asked by our office or by the university to be investigators or fact finders. Rather, if you're going to engage with the student and share, these are the concerns that I have, if the conversation turns into kind of this adversarial push and tug of like, I didn't, you don't have enough evidence, etc., you can pretty much just say, look, I'm not saying you did this. I'm saying there are concerns here, and because of these concerns, I want to have a conversation. I want to dive deeper into this. And it may be true that you didn't violate policy, and I would welcome that. But because of the fact that I have these concerns, I have an obligation to report it, and I have that obligation to you, just as I do for any of the students that are your peers. So being able to de-escalate and being able to share why the report is being submitted, and specifically what that information is, I think goes really hand in hand with the process as a whole.
I can just quickly add on to that. I also recommend faculty members to always have in mind that students are responsible for what they submit to the university, even if it's just a draft. And so encouraging to think about it's their responsibility for the students to submit, that the work that they submit conforms with the standards in place that they've accepted upon entering USC, but also that the faculty members are responsible to review these matters. So we all have a stake in academic integrity, students, faculty, and there's this third-party process in place with OAI that will help determine whether or not something happened and how do we intervene for the student to avoid this happening again. So it's always kind of thinking we're all in this together, not to sound cheesy, but reminding them that we are a community, an academic community committed to integrity.
I'd love to hear other perspectives as well on this one.
I can say something just briefly here. I do think it's important going into, and again, as you can probably tell from my previous remarks, I lean very heavy on prevention and kind of ongoing dialogue. And again, I'm in a somewhat luxurious position in that I teach smaller courses and have very kind of direct contact with my students and can start to intervene before if I see a student kind of struggling, I can start to intervene and say, okay, let's figure this out before they submit something, to Nancy's point. Like before they actually submit something, I can start kind of working some magic if I need to push them in the right direction. That said, when it does happen, I do think it's really important for faculty to have a very clear sense of what they believe the violation to be, like what they believe, and to be able to articulate it very clearly, right? Like, this is what I saw happening in this paper. There was incomplete paraphrase without a citation here, and being able to really like articulate those things clearly and explain why those things are inappropriate to the assignment. So I think while it's you don't want to kind of go in with a adversarial and kind of like almost like legalistic approach. You do need to have done your homework on your own end and thought through in your own head, like, why is this a problem relative to the assignment? Did I, when I was telling the students about how they could use generative AI, for instance, in relation to brainstorming or something like that, did I make it clear that when they go to move from brainstorming to drafting, that they have to do X, Y, and Z things, right? Are there ways in which things could have been misinterpreted based on some new assignment I'm doing or something like that? So I think having a very clear sense of what you believe went wrong so that you can explain it as clearly as possible to the student. And then that will, I think, in turn, help you explain why you are recommending faculty student resolution, or why you're recommending I have to send this directly to the Office of Academic Integrity or something like that. So I just think like taking a beat and not reacting emotionally. I mean, I remember when I was younger and I first started teaching, I would get really angry about academic integrity violations. Like they would really, I mean, you can ask my wife, I would like I would be so upset for, a few days. And I've really realized that that's the wrong approach. Like this isn't, in the same way that we don't want to, brand students as cheaters or anything like that. I think faculty, it's helpful to try and not take it personally. This isn't about you as an instructor necessarily, or the validity of your course or anything like that. It's just a set of circumstances that led to this academic integrity violation. And so I think trying to kind of approach it with a cool head and a sense of, okay, given the severity of what I'm seeing here, here's what I think should happen, and to be able to articulate that clearly.
And I think that ties in well, both from a faculty perspective of not passing judgment on yourself as an instructor, but also what Jacques was saying about students. And we're not making an assessment or judgment about that student and their identity. It's about their work. It's about their product. So it's almost in some sense removed from them in that sense, that it's not specifically to them. But that's difficult in the moment to think about and to really process. So I appreciate what Tom and Kathy added to that as well. So what I wanted to do is kind of wrap it up and then open it up for questions. And our final wrap-up question is for faculty members who may feel apprehensive about addressing academic integrity concerns directly with students. What support or resources are available to help facilitate these conversations effectively? And I'd love to hear what each of your units provides to faculty and students. And then if we can think of some other options on campus as well. So let's start out with Tom. Do you want to start?
Maybe, can I pass? I'm not sure I have a good answer right off the top of my head.
That's okay. Jacques,
better to say
Kathy,
I'll pass than to give a
okay,
bad answer.
no problem. I see Kathy raising her hand. So
Sure. So the Office of the Ombuds serves everybody on campus: students, faculty, staff, postdocs, alumni. So faculty are absolutely welcome to call Tom or myself to sort of say, there's a difficult conversation I have to have. This one particular student I'm a little afraid of because they tend to get very worked up. Can you help me rehearse this? Or can you look over this email just for tone to see if I'm, sort of coming across accusatory. So faculty are absolutely welcome to use our office. We support faculty. We never tell people what to do, but we can be a thought partner. The other thing is, and this has happened, sometimes students call me up panicked. I got charged with using artificial intelligence and I'm upset. They thought AI, the professor used AI, academic integrity, and it had an initial, and then artificial intelligence, AI. So for faculty, we would say in those initial conversations, use academic integrity as a word and artificial or generative AI as a term, because those two terms get mixed up in students' heads sometimes. So that's us.
and Jacques, I know your office has a lot of support as well.
We do. We provide support, and I just really want to before I go into that, just say thank you to Kathy for that, because it just so happened that our office got instituted in the same academic year that generative AI really kind of hit. And so while we would have liked to have this be called AI Week, we can't do that anymore. It is Academic Integrity Week, even if a lot of the sessions are on generative AI. But to that point, yeah, we provide a lot of resources both for students and for instructors. And one of the offices that we are thankful to have a relationship with is the Office of the Ombuds, to allow both students and instructors the opportunity to talk through some difficult conversations and situations, and to have a listening ear. Our office website has a lot of resources, and we're constantly adding those resources, growing that resource library for our instructors. Making sure that people are aware, both students and instructors are aware of what the pathways for reporting are, what the intent of our office is. We soon will have sample emails, templates for instructors to be able to utilize and mold to their own voice, to kind of help kind of navigate those initial conversations with students about those conversations about what seems to be a violation of academic integrity for their course. Dan, I can't stress this enough, how much it's really helpful to have that modeling of what it looks like, what academic integrity looks like in your course, because it really does change discipline to discipline. And the preventative education piece is huge. We've seen a really huge decrease in the number of reports coming from computer science, for example, when instructors will share, this kind of action of sharing code or obtaining code from sources like GitHub and then utilizing it in your own assignments, will come forward. Being able to share that, just like Turnitin, there is a similarity index tool for computer science code. And being able to inform students that we have these tools at our disposal helps prevent students from engaging in similar conduct. Even if other peers have told them, no, go ahead, use it, you'll never get caught. The instructors are really kind of sharing that elsewhere. For our students who might be in distress, this is highly anxiety potentially driven, and we recognize that. Just receiving an email from your instructor saying that there's a concern about your assignment, or receiving notification from our office, that can really create some different feelings. So in addition to the ombuds, the Center for we have CMH, the Center for Mental Health, Counseling Mental Health, excuse me, and then also Campus Support and Intervention Office. We work with them very closely. And as instructors, I would encourage you also to talk to your peers, other faculty, department chairs, deans. Seek out guidance in terms of whether or not, from an objective perspective, what you're seeing might be construed as a violation, or maybe a misunderstanding, or somewhere in between, and kind of what support and guidance might be able to be available to you. Based on other people's experiences. I mean, of course, from our office, we want you to report everything and anything, but we also want you to be comfortable in being able to have those conversations with students on the front end and gear them towards our office. So there's a plethora of resources, and I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out, but just to kind of give an idea of the fact that by reaching out to any one of these will likely create a snowball of other resources to follow.
Dan, I wanted to ask you, do you have specific resources that you would encourage faculty to use?
So one thing I would say, and just to echo what Jacques was just saying, I actually think it's really important for faculty within departments to talk to each other. This is something that came up in the Academic Senate this year, that it's important that students feel like there's some degree of consistency in their courses and what constitutes violation. So I actually think it's really, really critical for departments to sit down and have a discussion about the different kinds of assignments that they give in their classes and what constitutes a violation, or levels of potential violations of academic integrity, in terms of what sorts of things are fine to handle through a faculty student resolution process, what things don't necessarily even rise to the faculty student resolution that you want to put in a more preventative way, that sort of thing. And then ultimately, I think having a clear agreement among the faculty is very valuable. Another thing, and just put a plug for the Writing Center. The Writing Center, for folks, there's a lot of classes at every university that utilize writing assignments, but don't talk much about writing in the class itself. There's just here, do a paper, right? That sort of thing is kind of the type of assignment. I was an English major. I don't think my in the course of my time as an English major, I didn't get a lot of specific writing instruction in my English classes. I got it in my comp rep classes. So there's a lot of classes that give out writing assignments, but don't necessarily have a ton of supportive materials. I think the Writing Center is a huge resource on campus that has not only that where students can come in to talk with someone about these sorts of issues, about using sources properly, but there's also documentation. So if you're looking for, examples of, okay, here's how to talk to students about proper citation and what it looked like, models, things like that. There are tons of resources available on the Writing Center's website. So I think just, again, if you can build in a very small amount of preventative discussion at the beginning of your course, and then throughout each time you're going to have an assignment, build in a reminder of like, okay, we talked previously about kind of some of the traps when paraphrasing. Like let's just remind ourselves how to avoid that sort of thing. Again, there's models available via the Writing Center and other sites on campus.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on to that about the Writing Center. I'm Robert Waller. I'm the director of the Writing Center and a colleague of Dan's. And we do have one-on-one consultations available to students. People come in to talk about correct citation every single day, if it's APA or MLA or in Chicago or whatever their format is that they want to work on. In terms of resources for faculty, so we also provide in-class workshops. So for some of these classes that Dan's mentioning that don't have a big focus on writing instruction within their classes, more of a content class or a lecture class, we can send consultants to do a workshop. And we have one particular one, which is 4 ways of using sources, which is a preventative measure, right? If you can have multiple ways that you are comfortable using sources, you're going to be less likely to have an academic integrity problem. That tomorrow, as part of Academic Integrity Week, Dr. Mandy Hobmeyer, one of our faculty consultants at the Writing Center, will be doing giving the example of the 4 ways of using sources workshop tomorrow, I think around 3. So for professors who are interested and want to get a sample of what that would look like to have someone in their class, that is, and we have multiple other ones too, but that's the one most closely related to academic integrity.
Thank you for sharing those resources. And also, I would say the USC Libraries has some resources on this as well that you can use and share with your students in your learning management system or in announcements with students. I would also want to mention that the campus support and intervention, which Jacques mentioned, is also important. If you are having a conversation with a student and you become concerned about how they're reacting, that's a really great resource too, to contact them and say, hey, Ingrid was really upset when she left our meeting today, and it would be great if I'm concerned. So it would be great if somebody could reach out. So, and certainly at CET, we're happy to work with faculty as well, working through these processes of thinking about what do my assignments look like? How do they align with our learning objectives? And then we collaborate with a lot of other entities on campus, such as the Office of Academic Integrity and other faculty members, in terms of thinking about what is best in your discipline and how can you convey that and be transparent to our adult learners that we're working with here at USC. So I'm happy to open it up to we have a few minutes left. Happy to open it up to the floor and see if there are other questions.
Thank you all for being part of today's experience and talk. I wonder, Dan, in particular, you spoke about modeling different ways of writing and different ways of plagiarizing or not plagiarizing, revising. And when it comes to generative AI, I wonder what that looks like and how you as a faculty member have perhaps evolved your ideas of how students can use generative AI in their writings.
Yeah, this was something that we were discussing last week in the webinar that the Academic Senate hosted with the provost, jointly with the provost's office, and we only kind of scratched the surface on this. But for me personally, I've a really positive experience has been working as an AI fellow with the Center for Generative AI in Society. We've brought about 17 writing program faculty together to have these conversations about how we are thinking about using it in our classes, what we're concerned about, you know, student responses to when we say, okay, let's think about using ChatGPT as an ideation tool, or let's think about using ChatGPT to ask, you know, to ask a question about um, uh, what sorts of implications are in this thesis statement that I need to prove, or something like that, right? You're trying to kind of brainstorm. You know, we've gotten a lot of different reactions from students, where some students feel totally uncomfortable and kind of want to kind of push it away. Other students are intrigued. Other students are just confused, and they say like, well, this doesn't seem very good. So one of the things that I've done in my class is I've been very explicit about bringing examples from generative AI into class and saying, okay, here's the assignment that I've asked you to do. Here's the prompt question. So I fed this into GPT-4, and here's what it gave me. And then I say, okay, here's a better version of the, you know, more kind of appropriated version of the prompt question that is more in line with what I'm asking you to do based on your own experiences. And here's the essay it gave me. And then I'll walk through those essays with the students using our rubric and kind of going through and seeing how the essay does. And what they find is the essay doesn't do a very good job, right? Even with GPT-4, the essay is pretty weak, and they're able to, it becomes this learning experience for them where they're able to see pretty clearly based on our rubric what's wrong with this essay. And as we've kind of gone through, what they've found is, so in the writing program, we use 6 lenses to kind of look at an essay: cogency, support, control, addressing the issue, style, and grammar and mechanics. Pretty consistently, when I've done this each of the last now 3 semesters, the only area where they've found that ChatGPT is strong is grammar mechanics. In every other area, they're saying it's mostly weak, and you know, they've been a little bit generous with style, and they've said, okay, I guess it's moderately good in style, but in every other area, there's and especially the ones that matter, right? The argument, the evidence, the structure, it's weak. And so it becomes this kind of opportunity for them to see what is going well in their own writing that is not replicable in ChatGPT. And it's like, you don't actually want to sound like this is kind of the message that comes out of it. So I think engaging with it directly, showing them models, not being afraid to show them kind of what it does, it's not going to turn out a particularly incisive essay on Jane Eyre. It's going to turn out a pretty surface level essay on Jane Eyre. It's not going to turn out a particularly incisive essay on some really kind of complex topic in physics. It's going to be exactly what you would expect to find in a pretty surface level essay on this complex topic in physics. So I think actually embracing it as faculty, not because we want our students to necessarily use it, but embracing it just as something that exists, and trying to get our students to see both its potential applications, but also its real limitations as a tool, especially as it relates to things that are asking for them to express an opinion or have a point of view or do real thoughtful analysis. So bringing it into class and showing students models of it has been helpful, I think, in getting them to see that what they have to say is a lot more interesting, and ultimately to get whatever ChatGPT produces to the level that I would expect a good essay to be, they would have to do almost as much work as writing a good essay at that point. It involves so much prompting, so much revision, so much time spent thinking about why it's not very good, and then rewriting it, that they're much better off just rewriting it. We have that conversation very explicitly. So again, it's just, as I've developed more and more models related to other things, this is just another thing that I put in my model treasure chest that I'm going to show students every semester. Like, here's some examples of this. So once you develop these things, they become useful for a long period of time.
Yeah, just to add on to what Dan was saying, at the beginning of the fall, when the fellows of the Center for AI, Generative AI, were looking at this, it sort of seemed like the hype for AI was so strong, and it seemed like, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this problem? But what we've learned over the course of the past year is it's really not very good at many of these things. And if you show the students that and they experience it and they believe it too, they're like, oh yeah, that's not even just when things are blatantly wrong, but when they're super generic and vague. And so then even if you have a situation where you think like you've been through it, the students have all kind of agreed that and learned and found like, yes, these are the problems with it. But then maybe you have a situation where you have a paper come in and it looks like maybe the student did use AI for it. Now you don't, but you can't quite prove it. Sometimes it's enough to say, this looks like it could have been written by ChatGPT-4. And that enough that's a weakness of your paper. So you need to make it better, even if you can't necessarily prove it. If they start to realize that AI is not this panacea that's going to do all their homework for them and solve their problems, that can be a helpful way to use it.
I think the only thing that I would add, I absolutely agree with everything that you both shared about this. Coming from removing from the proactive to the preventative, or excuse me, from the preventive to the reactive area. I also just want to say, if you have reason to think that that generative AI was utilized and that would be a resource that's not permitted in the assignment, you do not, as an instructor, need to have definitive proof of its use to feel comfortable and confident in reporting it to our office. Now, that being said, we would, excuse me, we will ask what led you to think of this? What were the areas of concern? What were the, was it because it was incredibly vague? Was it because it was, hallucinating citations? What were the factors, so that when we're having the conversations with the student, we can identify that? And one of the things that I'd like for instructors to know is, even in the incident, if it comes to that we don't have enough evidence to support a finding of responsibility, that doesn't mean that we can't have that educational conversation and that there isn't value. So a lack of responsibility is not a lack of support for faculty, nor is it definitively saying that the student, either quote unquote got away with something or was wrongly alleged to have violated policy. All of these things can happen simultaneously, that there is not enough information and yet they still did potentially use it and they still have a poorly written paper.
Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to thank all of our panelists for coming together today. This is not something obviously that can be solved in 60 minutes, but hopefully it gave you some strategies and techniques and started the reflection process on what you can do as a faculty member and also how you can support students in adhering to academic integrity at USC. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.